Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Charlie Fraser. I'm the director of an organization called the Entrepreneurial Refugee Network, TERN as an acronym. And we work with refugee entrepreneurs to empower them to achieve their business ambitions and to become active members of their local markets and communities. And I have the great pleasure today of introducing the session entitled On the Move, Shaping Europe's Future Through Artistic Mobility and Global Cultural Networks. What we're going to be exploring in the discussion that comes later on is whether we can shape Europe's future through artistic mobility and cultural networks, and if we can, what should that future look like and how do we achieve it? But before we get stuck into the sort of nitty-gritty of that discussion, I'm just going to hand over to each of the three experts on the panel today to just briefly introduce their work and what they do, and then we'll get stuck into the actual debate around shaping Europe's future through artistic mobility. So first up, we have Olof, who is the director of We Are Europe, and he'll give you a little bit more context about the work he's doing now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to come to the Mapping Festival. My name is Olof. I run a festival in the Netherlands called Today's Art. It's a festival for art, music and technology. We use the cultural infrastructure of a city to program, so the empty buildings, the theaters, the museums. And the festival is running for almost 15 years. But today I will not present you about the festival. I will present you about We Are Europe, which is a network of 8 festivals. And actually, I think the topic today is about Europe. And actually, exactly 60 years ago, a bunch of smart guys went to Rome and they signed a treaty, which was the foundation of Europe. And now, 60 years later, we are celebrating this, but we are also questioning this unity. On one side of Europe, there is a country who wants to leave Europe, and on the other side, there is countries who want to join this Europe. So I think this is a bit the topic that we will discuss today as well.
That fight for innovative and digital cultures, electronic and independent music, a cutting-edge artistic vision, open-mindedness. These festivals have decided to build forums about European consciousness, commitment and citizenship, cultural and artistic innovation and entrepreneurship, emerging cultures and creativity, about today's ideas for tomorrow's culture. This is We Are Europe, gathering 8 European organizations, each one a festival forum. We are in Austria, France, Germany, Greece, the Netherlands, Norway, Serbia, Spain. Each year we welcome 300,000 festival and forum goers, 8,000 professionals, 500 artists, 300 speakers. We make people, audiences, artists and speakers move within Europe, but also and especially artistic works, ideas and initiatives. By the end of 2018, in our forums, we'll have worked on a shared topic every year. Through our festivals, we'll have built no less than 56 co-curated music programs, hosted residencies, commissioned artistic performances. We want to give a voice to a new generation of cultural changemakers, because we are Europe. Say something.
So We Are Europe. Actually, what brings us together is a union of 8 organizations from 8 different countries, and spread all over the continent. I think what you see already here in this map, what's interesting is that for us there is actually 2 things. There is the EU, which is this bureaucratic monster based in Brussels, and there is Europe. And these 2 things are, I think, something that we have to consider, because in the network that we are operating in, there are actually 2 countries that do not belong to the EU, Norway and Serbia. So what we are trying to do is to celebrate diversity and the cultural exchanges between these countries in festivals. Very much in the field of digital culture, contemporary culture, innovation and diversity in that field. Personally, I think that the digital culture is very present today. We have technology all around us. And I would even dare to say that if Michelangelo or Van Gogh would live right now, I doubt he would use paint, but he would probably use something else. Our goal is to find or to rebuild Europe, especially the European consciousness. Something that I think we as European citizens took completely for granted in the past 50 years. And for me, when I saw, for example, the inauguration of Donald Trump in the US, a big reaction in the world happened, like big protests. And I think this was not against Donald Trump in general. This was already this rise of consciousness that people start to realize what we have. Especially here in Europe, we were always in the middle of this big so-called Cold War that kept everything in balance, and that was actually pushing innovation a lot. Europe was this stable part in the middle with deep culture, with a lot of diversity, and we start to realize that we build on this diversity and we're very proud of it. So all these 8 festivals are also related to other places in the world. So, for example, Sonar is one of the partners in this network, is active in Iceland, in Japan, many places in the world. Myself, I work a lot in Russia. So these organizations, by also sharing these networks beyond Europe, we're able to reach out to a lot of people. This is the list of festivals that are part of this We Are Europe network. We see CO-Pop in Cologne, Insomnia in Tromsø, above the Arctic Circle, Resonate in Belgrade, Sonar Barcelona, Elevate in Graz in Austria, Misonor in Lyon, which is happening right now. It kicked off last night. Reworks in Greece, and ourselves in the Netherlands. I will go a bit quickly through it. Actually, when we look at what we do, is we have a budget from the EU for 3 years. Every year, these 8 festivals, they invite each other. Like in my case, every year I invite 2 festivals and I go to 2 festivals. And we share programs, not only by programming what is existing, but we also like to spend the budget into commissioning new works. And then to create a big mobility of artists around Europe. So we have artists from all corners of Europe now being presented in our festival networks. And probably also artists that are not the usual suspects to be programmed by, for example, the big ones as Sonar and Misonor. We focus on innovation, and I think that for innovation you need 3 things. One is money, the second one is networks, and the third one is ideas. And I think it's safe to say that in the creative field that we're in right now, even here in the mapping festivals, we have the ideas. We also have networks, but we lack the money. And this is where I think it's very powerful to collaborate together on all the levels that we have, like big festivals, small festivals. Some are in very open countries, some are in countries where there is no funding. And let's share this to create a new innovation model. I will go a bit quickly through everything. We have, for the 3 years of funding, we defined 3 themes. The first theme last year was cultural entrepreneurship. So how do we work in this European field? How do we collaborate? It was also a year of getting to know each other a lot. This year we will work on the theme, the role of culture in the city of the future. So it will be very much focusing on what the role of a city is in how we define our societies. I think interesting to see that we live in a world that majority of people are moving to cities, and the urban space is a very interesting kind of environment to work on a cultural level. We need to do it more radically, I think, even, because if you look at most cities, most city centers actually, it's driven by money, and it's driven by the big corporations that build like the H&Ms and the big shops and everything, but that the result is that every city will look the same. Look at an average American city. It's hard to find a specific restaurant in between all the chains of restaurants that you see in every city. And the last year will be more activistic, like what is the role of European culture from an activistic point of view. Of course, there's a lot of diversity involved. We have these 8 festivals. Together, we reach out to 300,000 festival goers. We invite, purely in this project, around 90 artists and 75 speakers. Every festival has, next to a music and art program, also a conference to it. And this is where we discuss actually these topics. From these 90 artists, 48 are from the EU, and 67 are from the rest of Europe, and 23 are from the rest of the world. Yeah, we cross artistic identities. It's actually more than just sharing the artist. Within our festivals, we also invite journalists from all the participating countries to write specifically about what is this European identity and where are we going to. We focus not too much on the commercial aspects of the industry, but really more on movements like what is happening also in the Middle East, what kind of new sounds are coming from there, and how can we mix these things beyond Europe, actually. Yeah, I don't want to talk all afternoon, so I will pass the microphone to colleagues in Spain.
Thank you, Olaf. Just quickly, very quickly, before we introduce Luthia, I just have a question I wanted to chuck to you just before we get into the proper discussion after we introduce Bert and Luthia. And that is, very simply, what do you think unites Europe? Not the EU, but Europe.
It's culture. Yeah, very clearly. Because we all speak different languages, but the shared culture, the deep history that we have, and the openness to the rest of the world, I think this is what keeps Europe together. I think in the past 15 years there was a bit of a negative feel towards this Europe, but I think this is more related to what I mentioned before, the EU, and not so much Europe. I mean, we even see it, that's maybe more the field that you work in, the refugees. It's for a specific reason that they all want to come to this Europe. And unfortunately, human trafficking is taking a lot of advantages on this by promoting it in such a way like you just have to go there and you will have the career of your dreams. I think reality is tougher. It's also tougher for countries who want to join the EU, for example, like Serbia or Montenegro. There is this, like, okay, when we will be part of Europe, we will have the same salaries as what they have in Amsterdam. I think life will even become more expensive. So there is this double-edged sword always. But I also feel there is a young generation that is way younger than we are here, actually here in the room, who is completely open and positive and who will use this Europe much better as that we did in the past 15 years. Thank you.
And I think that idea of culture being a driving force for shaping future is something that is going to come across hopefully quite strongly from our discussion later on. It's now my pleasure to introduce Luthia. Luthia is the director of the Laboral Cultural Centre, and to tell you a little bit more about the centre's work, here is Luthia.
Thank you. Let me just punctualize. I'm the co-director. I'm the managing director of Laboral, but I team up with an artistic director, Karin Olenstager. And so my task is to deal with all these politicians, budgetary issues, general management of the center. And to tell you a bit about my background, I'm a law graduate, so I'm a lawyer. I postgraduated in cultural management and also in European affairs. And after working for 7 years at the International Contemporary Art Fair in Madrid, ARCO, as deputy director, I had a great opportunity to finally leave the art market, or the contemporary art market, and profit from and benefit from the input and motivation that means being closer to the artists, that are always the core and the most important part of what we're dealing with in our everyday life. So I work at Laboral since the very beginning. This is an art center that is based in the north of Spain, in a city called Gijón. It's a small city, it's 300,000 inhabitants, more or less, in between Bilbao and Galicia, so you can picture it. It's really difficult to get there, but it's really difficult also to get out of there. So it always takes us forever. But then I always think getting to Linz is not easy either. And then I get motivated also. Laboral started back 10 years ago in 2007, and it was an initiative of the Principality of Asturias, which is the regional government. So it was like the flag of a political party. It was constituted as a private foundation. We had private funding and public funding, both. Then over the years, things have changed so much. We don't have private funding, but we don't have public funding either. So we found our way through networks. First, you can think, why these networks? To be honest, you try to find money. And yeah, normally in the past, we wanted to be networks to get the money and do our own thing, because we have certain and particular issues in our communities, in our local communities, and particular needs that we need to fill in to be able to be loved by our local communities. But then after these different experiences, I am very proud to say that we are in 3 European projects. This gives us a lot of prestige. This gives us reasons to defend the project when it comes to our local funders. And in the end, it helps us survive in many ways. In the intellectual way, because there's a lot of intellectual input. And, you know, this is... I mean, knowledge sharing, it sounds really good, but it's a fact. We work from the periphery. We're in this city in the north of Spain. It has good things and bad things. It's got great things for the artists. You can, you know, you get this feedback from them that it's really, really nice to work kind of isolated in this particular area, but with resources, with motivation, with I'm going to play this video with no sound, so you can you can see what I'm talking about, because here. Yep. So is it working? Okay, help. Sorry, but I'll continue in the. There you go. So it started as we're based in a former Universidad Laboral. It's an old building from the 70s that was initially a place where carpenters and technicians and people would come to Gijón and learn these different professional, how jobs. And now it's rebuilt into an art center, and it's 14,000 square meters, so it's pretty big to handle, and it's very expensive. And so throughout the years and throughout all these cuts, we have changed the model a little bit. Not changed because it was meant to be. It was meant to be a research and production center. It was meant to be an exhibition center. It was meant to be an educational center, and we're still that. We don't do those many exhibitions anymore, collective exhibitions, but we're focused on production, research and production, and we're focused on education. And when we talk a bit later, we will talk, and I really want to talk about the experience we have with the educational program of Laboral. Also, We Are Europe, we have 3 European projects. One of them is conducted by Ars Electronica, it's the European Digital Art and Science Network, where we partake together with other institutions. The idea in this network is, they have 2 profiles or 2 different natures of institutions. They have scientific institutions and they have cultural institutions. We've collaborated with Ruth, she was here a while ago, and Monica at CERN, with a semiconductor production at CERN. But we have done many other residencies at ESO, for example, the European Southern Observatory. And we plan on doing other residencies at the ESA, the European Spatial Agency, and also the Fraunhofer. And so we have scientific institutions, and we have cultural institutions. We have the Center for Promotion of Science in Belgrade, the Etopia Center in Zaragoza, Laboral, GB Art in London, Science Gallery in Dublin, of course Ars Electronica, as I mentioned. And apart from this European project, we have our own, we lead another European project, which is called ENCAC. ENCAC is the European network for audiovisual creation, and this brings us closer to mapping. That even mapping is not, it's a non-European country. We have non-European partners in there, together with other European partners. Resonate is in there, and also L'Eli Unique, also again Ars Electronica, HTH, which is a National Dramatic Center in Montpellier, Missimo People, and CTM in Berlin, and then 2 Canadian partners, which is Avatar, which is a production center, mainly for electronics and sound, the Electra Festival, and MUTEC in Mexico. So in general, I just don't want to explain the whole thing because I think it's kind of boring to go through. And we should do something like that. That is very much, so much easier, no? Marketing, video, everyone understands. And then our 3rd European project comes after our experience in the educational field. For over 6 years, we have been working, and we were lucky enough to convince the politicians in our local region, in our region, and we've been working within the formal education with artists, introducing new methodologies, and through the approach of the creative and creative use of technology. And we have worked with artists towards design and digital fabrication. We have worked with artists towards audiovisual languages. We have worked with artists towards creative programming and robotics. And that led us to participate in this Erasmus European project that we're partaking at now. And so if I pass it on and then we talk.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Now we just have one final panelist to introduce you to. That's Bert. Bert is the chair of the Open Method of coordination working group on mobility support programs. So very well voiced in this particular area. But if you wouldn't mind using Olaf's microphone just to quickly give a little bit of context, see if that one works. There you go.
Yes, it
Yes,
works.
fantastic. Thank you.
For many years I was an organizer of festivals, concerts, artist residence programs. Later on I got involved in representing the artist interests, cultural policies. In my hometown Amsterdam, a town where more than 50% of its present population has a migrant background, either their parents or born themselves. I was elected chairman of the City Council Committee for Culture and Media. I was involved in the national level, not only in culture, but also advisory role in migration regulations for artists in the Netherlands. And finally, like you mentioned, for 6 years I was involved in Brussels in thinking about how can there be better conditions for artists, cultural programs and mobility schemes. Why? Because projects like you just heard in presentations of, they are extremely important in building the cultural component of Europe, and then is money concerned, and more than money. But that's one of the reasons why it was quite a fascinating adventure to be part of committees in which members of more than 20 European countries, what can be lost in translation, discussed about all kinds of subsidy policies. And if you're not allergic for bureaucracy, that's what I am, then it can be a very nice role to think there how projects like yours can be a bit better served on that level. 3 things I would like shortly to share with you. Why is in those days of digital and technological interconnectivity, physical exchange programs important? Let's go physical. I mean, digital is only 2 of your 5 senses. It's only your eyes and your ears. How about your taste? Your touch and what's the other one? You understand?
Smell.
Like on this very nice informal meeting, and that is essential in all international working together. The second is, it's so important that on the European level, but also on the national level, the subsidy programs, the support programs are being readjusted to the new artistic practice. Artists do work very differently than 20 years ago. Of course, they go virtual, but they also go practical. They study in different countries in Europe. They work much more in a fluid, cooperative way, less competitive. They less put their cards on the formal, structured, interchangeable programs which you have to apply for 2 years before. So it's very important that we tried on the European level to have a closer look at a less formalized, more fluid, more nomadic schemes of cultural cooperation, because it's very paradoxical. Sometimes it's easier to get your support for a high budget, very professionalized, very expensive project than for a fluid, very vital, smaller project. And those things do change in Europe and also in the national level. My final thing is freedom of expression. It's a controversial issue. It should be here a controversial issue. I sincerely doubt if we do live in Europe in an interconnected world. Technology is very important in the art field, but sometimes I feel that in our field we are too naive, too much in the spell of the positive sides of the technological possibilities. Art can divide, art can destruct. We know in Europe that national cultural programs, Hungary, Poland, France, other places, are not positive programs. So I think it's very important to support, to make possible the informal, physical communities of sharing ideas and information. Also as a countervailing power, and then I'm finished, that Google is not a country, but Google is a superpower, like Facebook, like Twitter. And we only know half how much regulation, how much authoritarian regulation is being designed there and implemented that will limit your form of expression in pictures, in music and everything, by calling upon national security. or calling upon child abuse, or pornography, or on religion, or on diversity. I think it's extremely important to have own free autonomous areas of interchange where you can connect with people in the neighborhoods, and that the narrative of how our art and culture lives with the new technology takes into account the bright side and the dark side. And there is a very dark side, and that narrative can only be a good narrative if it's not written by the elite, like we're all part of, when the narrative is being written by more people from diverse backgrounds in the heart of Europe.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Thank you, Bert. That was fantastic. Before we get stuck in really to the actual theme of the discussion, just a very quick question for you on what you were saying there around superpowers and the dark side and naivety. Do you think if you see these tech giants and this new form of tech creation developing as the new superpowers in the world today, that makes traditional concepts of power around nations and continents obsolete, or do you think it can work within traditional understandings of national power? Sorry, it's a very big question to start, but then we will move on to the traditional one. Not working day.
Yeah, that's a very big question indeed. I think by definition, sitting here talking about Europe, national boundaries, national preferences are not so extremely important. But I find it difficult to find short words to answer your question. Maybe you could take a little part out of your question, yeah. Otherwise I'll start talking too much.
Okay. Do you think that countries and concepts of union around nations remains relevant today?
Yes, it does. But the civic society is much more important. I was impressed in the first presentation this afternoon about the black rain from the universe, from the galaxy, and how those artists brought that energy, that nearly spiritual energy of the galaxy into visual and musical, amazing. I'm at the moment part of the Alzheimer's Society in Amsterdam. I've been viewing a lot of films and pictures of the brain. Nearly the same pictures which you can show of the universe, you can see in the brain, where we at the moment go. And I see the same fascination there with technology, that how can technology help people out of space, lost in memories with Alzheimer, to keep them on Earth, make it possible to live with their difficulties. But I see there the bright side and the dark side, and that's why because the bright side is, it's great when designers help to design sensors so that from a distance you can see if a man or a woman living with Alzheimer, if he or she falls or doesn't come out of bed, that singles co-air. That's great. But the dark side, how will people live with technical support and less with human support? I just mentioned as an example, I think the same can happen in the cultural field when we are too much fascinated by the technological side and not enough with the human side. And therefore I think that international low-scale programs which can connect with neighborhoods, can connect with people, are so extremely important to find that narrative.
Yeah, it may sound like a auto-promotion.
No, you
but we actually have an exhibition at Laboral displayed which is called The Monsters of the Machine. And this is an exhibition curated by Mark Garrett, Fatherfield. And it's got a tag title or subtitle which is called The Frankenstein of the 21st Century. And we have, I'm very proud to say that most of the artists are women artists, not necessarily working with technology, but putting in evidence what could happen when we lose the physicality of, or when we suffer the isolation of being hyper-connected through technology. And it's a great exhibition, check it out, and, or pass by. But we have a dissemination program with schools, and it's working amazingly. If I link this to our experience with the educational system and the educational program of Laboral, it's funny because we were talking a while ago. We're educating our kids and our children to be, we don't know what, because most of the professions and jobs will not exist in the near future. And we see that when we start the school year teaching the teachers from analogical to technological to digital. And we have to do backwards with the students. We have to teach them, because of what you were saying, the digital natives, we have to teach them from digital to analogical. And that's how they can also understand how we can also warn them of these things. And I don't know.
Double-edged, yeah.
Yeah.
Would you like to just come in on that?
Wrapping a bit up what both of you were discussing, I really see a couple things, like you're focusing on education, and you also talked about this young generation, and I think this education is very crucial, especially the use of technology, for example, because we live in this world of rapid change, and technology in the past 25 years, I mean, internet was not existing 30 years ago. And now our kids are born, they are connected from day one, they are born, they have access to unlimited amounts of information. But in this unlimited amount of information, we also have to teach them what is the right and what is the wrong information, what is the dark side and what's the good side. We are raised in a time that there was one guy on television giving the 8 o'clock news, and he was telling the truth. Now there's 25 guys, and who is telling the truth? This is not being taken care of in education. We still learn to be a banker or a hotel manager or whatever. Jobs that maybe not even exist in the future. But also very important questions that I think will give more... I mean, when we look back at art and philosophy, for example, I think these are the disciplines that will become super important in the coming years. This technological world around us is raising a lot of questions. On one hand, we love it, that everything becomes smart. We have computers and screens all around us all the time. Soon there will be organs coming out of 3D printers, but if we can make a heart, maybe we can make a better heart. Can we edit nature? Who are we as humans? Then technological improvements of the self-driving car. This car will have to make decisions at some time. You are sitting in there and there's someone in front. Will it protect you or the person in front? And what if the person in front is a young girl with a lifetime potential, or an old man, or someone who voted right-wing government? The machine knows because of all these algorithms. These are things that we need to answer, and I think I really trust on this young generation to answer these very difficult questions, which are touching ethics and culture.
But in that, how important is the breadth of that generation in terms of production in answering those questions? What Bert alluded to, and I know that you yourself have alluded to in the past, is this the danger of this new language of technology being dominated by a very small minority. In the way that production has always been created in the past, power has been concentrated within a minority. And now the dream of technology is that it is the breadth of it. But obviously that's the breadth of consumption at the moment, that's not the breadth of production. And your hope is that the future generations will be able to have a breadth of production. Do you think that's actually going to happen? Do you think we'll be able to see that?
Well, I mean, if we continue like this, the machine will take over our jobs. So what will we do as humans? Will we become jobless, and what about our income? And that's the next question, like income. If you look at food production in the world and money, there's enough to distribute over the whole planet, and then everyone can have a good life. But the way we distribute this is probably wrong. And I think you also addressed it. It has, you know, this creative. Everyone, like a lot of policymakers, are like, okay, creative industries is the future, and we'll go give all the answers to the problems that we have right now. But still, this creativity is put in an economical model, and that's the same with science, for example. Science and culture and philosophy are maybe the highest levels that we can reach as human species. But this autonomy, if you have science which is completely funded by the medicine world, you will have, they will create medicines for a virus that they created 1 week before. So this autonomy, I think, is very important, and like you said, the art and culture is not always the beautiful thing and the nice thing. It can also destruct, it can be painful, and it can open your eyes and inspire.
And how just on that, how do we think that mobility, just relating back to the title, how do we think mobility ties into that system of creation?
Well, I'm going to be a bit romantic here, but this is my belief.
It's dark, so.
We've been, yeah, right. But we've been here all day listening to amazing manifestations and of works of art that tackle all of these risks, warns, dangers of technology. I truly believe that artists can change, can help shape the future for the society. I truly believe that. And how do we help disseminate this word? I mean, I'm a cultural manager. I can only provide the platforms and provide the liaisons and the networks and the right places for them to show this out. So, like you said, when you were looking at this video, and you know, artists can imagine a future, can look at technology in a critical and creative way, not in a passive way. This is something that also Regine was talking about this morning, and artists are engaged with social issues. We just have to provide the tools and the scenarios for them to speak up. And this is why we put up these networks. We put them up because we need funds for our institutions, but in fact, who has to talk is not Laboral, Ars Electrónica, Mapping. This is a platform to give the relevance to the new narratives that we all work for. So, you know.
I think I share your optimism. But when I stress the darker sides in this debate, it's because I think we should have more attention for that. I want to mention two things. Of course, economics should not dominate the cultural field, but it's also partly a purely cultural problem. In Amsterdam, like I said, more than 50% is from migrant background. That makes Amsterdam an exciting city. But at the same time, for instance, the Turkish community in Amsterdam, by the modern technology, they can keep on living in two countries at the same time. You live in Amsterdam and you live in Turkey. Does that connect people? It disconnects people. That is a cultural problem we do not have an answer to. The second is, last week in the Netherlands, there was a lot of newspaper coverage because there was another survey about what does the frequent use of the social media does to the school-going youngsters. I'm a father of 4, so maybe I read those articles more. A lot of depressivity, bad feelings in a lot of youngsters is there. That's no news for you probably. But I was so shocked nearly by what many youngsters said as how they defended themselves against those negative influences. They said to each other, we try to learn to say to each other, what we see digital, it's not reality. If it's not reality, it will not hurt us. If you think about that, I mean, Trump is one thing with fake facts, But if young people, in their urge to protect themselves against the chaos about the influence from the social media, which is a richness, but they have to tell each other, it's not reality. I was shocked, and I don't know the answer, but so that are the darker sides, and it's a cultural thing and not an economical thing.
That actually leads quite nicely into my next question for you all, which is, we have, I think, hopefully you've come through what you guys are saying, an optimistic vision of where technology and mobility and art can take us, and that it promotes the very best of humanity in terms of inclusivity and openness and exploration and intelligence. But there is obviously significant challenges, and Bert has alluded to some of them there. What are the sort of biggest challenges that you see preventing us getting to that endpoint? And then we'll move on to hopefully how we might overcome them, and we can perhaps also reference to Bert if you have any response directly to his challenges that he's raised.
Can you rephrase the question?
So the very first question is just quite simply, what are the biggest challenges, do you think, facing artistic mobility today? And that vision of the future. The biggest challenge.
Specifically on artistic mobility.
Specifically on and cultural networks.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, let's go outside of Europe. An economic, very powerful region in the world, Silicon Valley, for example. All the tech companies, these monsters that are not countries but maybe more powerful than countries, are based there. And for their development and for the future, they need the brightest minds of the planet to come and work there. And there is the simple fact that the United States has a very strong and powerful immigration policy that's even becoming stronger. That means that they will not have access to the brightest minds anymore. They will have only access to their own American market. And I think this is the first sign of Silicon Valley losing its power. So this openness of moving of people all over this world is I think, something crucial. And to not have borders on this.
And do you think that challenge of borders is, which way do you think we're moving on that?
Well, it's insane that, 30 years ago we broke down a wall in Berlin. And then 10 years later, they built a new wall between Israel and Palestine, and now they want to build another wall in Mexico and whatever. This shows that we actually didn't learn from history, or maybe it's the same people who are trying to be the masters of this history all over and over again. And it's time for this new generation, I think, to say that we need to move on and we need to have a new kind of world. And this is this raise in consciousness, I think. When we see the technology and when we can give it a place in our human society, then maybe there is a chance that we can live a little bit longer on this planet. Because otherwise the doom scenarios are there that the planet will live on, but we as humanity will not, because we fucked it up. And that's also a natural cycle.
That's a great answer. Lithia, do you have anything you want to add to that in terms of the biggest challenges?
Well, I agree totally. I mean, it's really difficult for me to identify. I identify, when we were talking previously through Skype, I was saying, what type of role can an institution like ours play to make things go smoothly or more smoothly, I don't know. I wanted to give you an example very fast. In the educational system in Spain, if you come from, like, mobility, there's always so many things going on, political issues, but there's also, when you get to one place, you arrive there, and the educational system is not helping at all. The example is, I have an integration classroom in this year in the educational program, and these children or these youngsters, they don't have any problem, but they're put into a specific program just because they have a language barrier. I have people from Syria, I have people from Senegal, I have people from China. They simply don't speak the language. And therefore, when they come to the formal system, they put them in a class as the rest of the children that have problems in learning. And so it's totally crazy, you know? And what role can we play? Well, we can give them some tools for them to communicate differently. We can show them other imaginaries, I don't know how to say in English, but we can give them another context so that, like the rest of the children that will follow this early dropping off school program, that they will fail for sure, so that they don't have to do the same. They have a future. And from an institution like ours, this is what we can do. Like persist in doing things like this. Education, education, education. And just participating in, we cannot do huge exhibitions with, name dropping is gone. But we can still do this job, and this is what we're focused in. And we can also continue these networks to show artist works that tackle all these subjects, and we should support that, and we should make an effort with that, and of course get the money from the European Union again.
I think we came from a very vertical approach on how things were running, and vertical, this has everything to do with economic growth, with profit, with brands, with egos. And I think we can all agree that this world is finally changing. And I think personally that this vertical model is falling down, like on the top, but also underneath. And we're slowly going to a horizontal model where it's about sharing this knowledge and sharing experience. And together we can do something better. I think this is the basis of what we're trying to do on these artistic levels, to exchange the knowledge, to exchange the artistic ideas from what's relevant in our own country. And that we find this technology and creativity as actually what connects us all over us, and the good and the bad side.
Bert, you want to...
We have to learn to live with diversity. I think that's the main thing. I'm from the town where Vincent van Gogh was murdered on the streets. At the moment in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, the public debate is about if female police officers are allowed to wear a headscarf on duty. Free speech, freedom of expression, it has to be there. And that Google and others are making the rules, I hate their rules, because there's no elected parliament or accountability for the rules. But I think we need some rules to combine the freedom of expression, the freedom of information, the freedom of speech, and learning to live with diversity. If we don't learn with diversity, the inclusive society will be a fake society.
I think
and that's why mobility matters so much. That can be places, but then look around. We have also in meetings like this, learn to live with the controversial issues of diversity.
Yeah, that's completely right. And Thea just said something to me that she said right at the start when we started talking, which is we have to make mobility natural. We have to make diversity not a challenge, not even something to be commented on, but something that is completely part of the systems that we are. Existing at the core of what we are. We're out of time, unfortunately. I think we could go on for quite a long time because this is a very interesting area, but I hope the sort of key theme that I'm taking away from this discussion is that if we're shaping Europe's future to be one that we want it to be, and with a horizontal breadth, as you were saying, a takedown of the vertical model that we've seen in traditional power systems for a very long time, then we need to empower artist voices, and we need to empower the new generation to come through and be able to reclaim a technical language that is currently being owned by a minority. And I want to thank you all very much for taking part in the conversation. It was really interesting, and I hope you guys all took as much from that as I did. And please do come up and speak to any of the ones if you have any further questions. I'm sure that some of you do have questions. We've run out of time for a Q&A with you guys because we got too carried away. But thank you very much.